Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. As someone who spent most of my career working in bureaucracies, being called creative is the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me. So I want to thank you for having me here. And also, before I get started, I want to say this is not just an event, it's a community. So if it's your first time, I hope you'll come back, and I hope you'll be part of what the Creative Mornings team is doing here in Seattle. So is everyone in this room familiar with IFT? Okay, awesome. So for those of you who aren't, the handful, IFT is an actual real internet thing that helps you connect things across the internet. You can write a very simple recipe or use a very simple recipe that says, for example, to send a tweet when you publish a blog post, or keep a spreadsheet of all the songs you listen to so you don't forget. But I find it's also useful as a shorthand for change. A very easy framework for thinking about how change might happen. If this, then that. One thing triggers another. My favorite example of an if this, then that recipe of any kind is a Twitter bot called Open Data Taylor Swift. Now, this Taylor Swift only has around 400 followers, not nearly as many as the real Taylor Swift, but we are dedicated fans because the open data community is small and passionate. And what Open Data Taylor Swift does for us on occasion when we send a really great tweet is she will retweet it and simply replace the words open data with Taylor Swift. So I call your attention to the tweet in the lower right corner. Taylor Swift is increasingly the metric by which a city's transparency is measured. I think we're doing well here. So what I'd like to ask us to do this morning to kick us off is create a little if this then that recipe of our own. So first, if everyone could just pick a word that brings you great joy in your mind. Got it? Okay, now I'm gonna ask everyone to stand up and very quickly make a little group of 3 to 4 people. Don't introduce yourselves yet. I should have pulled the silence. All right, guys. I'm sorry, I should have finished my recipe before I let you start talking. So I want you guys to introduce yourselves, but what you're gonna do is instead of talking about your work, wherever you would describe your work, I want you to use your word. So for me, for example, my name is Candace Faber. I love pineapples. So I'm the pineapple advocate for the city of Seattle. I love how pineapples make our democracy more open. So if all of you could do that, it would be awesome. We ready to come back? So I hope we're ready to come back. I hope everyone is feeling a little bit more joyful. What's awesome, last night when I practiced this talk with my sister, who's a hairdresser, her response was, "I cut rainbows," which I thought was amazing. And today it was cheeseburgers, cool. So as I mentioned, I haven't always described myself or necessarily thought of myself as a creative. My background is actually in politics. I have a bachelor's in political science, a master of science in foreign service. Basically, I spent my entire academic career studying how to make political and social change, looking at history or examples across cultures for ways that we might do things differently, thinking about them in a more kind of comparative sense of the word. And then I was lucky enough to be one of the handful of political science majors who actually ended up working in the field. But I had a particular interest in overseas affairs, so I joined the US Department of State. I was less interested in elections, probably for the same reason that whoever drew this graffiti on a wall in Lviv, Ukraine was. For those of you who don't speak Ukrainian, this says, "Our candidate." I think many people believe that elections are important, but perhaps not the most important way to make social change. I mean, you might as well be voting for a banana. I was working in Poland from 2008 to 2010 during a time of really immense social change, probably nothing on the scale of what's happening there now, but it was very exciting. I got to talk about, for example, how the United States wrestled with our own social change and policy around LGBTQI rights. It was actually very useful in a deeply Catholic country to be honest about our experience in the United States and say, hey, this wasn't easy. But I still felt like we had maybe the right answers. I went from there to Afghanistan, a very different environment, perhaps one of the only places in the world where you'll see the words trauma and laundry right next to each other on a sign and in real life. And this is where I actually got really, really frustrated with the way that the United States government operates and the way that our foreign policy worked. We went into another country with the idea that we had the right answer, that we could say, well, this isn't working, so if we make this change, then this other thing will happen. I think a lot of people, when they think about what it might be like to serve in a place like Afghanistan, might think, oh, scary, mountains, war. This was a little bit more reflective of my experience. We lived on a compound that was very difficult to leave. This is from our Mardi Gras party. I'm not kidding you. That's a real thing that happened in Kabul. And in case you can't read it, this truck is called Pollock's Revenge. One of our biggest hardships in life was that we were eating pollock 3 to 4 days a week, and usually it was the same pollock, just left over from the night before and refried. It was very challenging to be in a war actually putting our lives at risk and having really put a lot of effort into getting ready for that tour, training, and wanting to make a difference, only to show up and find out that everything had sort of already been preordained. In particular, there were 3 things that our employer was not very ready to deal with. The first was risk. We did everything possible to minimize risk, or at least minimize the perception that we were taking unnecessary risks, including, as I mentioned, spending our entire tour on a compound. Oddly enough, the entire time that I was there, one of the biggest terrorist attacks in Kabul was on our compound, but at least being behind those giant walls made us feel safe. The second was uncertainty. If anyone in this room has ever worked in politics, you know it's not generally a good idea as a politician to go forward and say things like, I don't know, or I'm not certain what the answer is. We were the US diplomats. We were the ones in power. We were supposed to be able to tell these people what to do with their lives, right? And the final thing is loss of control, which is something I think a lot of us struggle with. We want to believe that we know what's going on. But it sort of struck me that this philosophy led us to not go into places where we weren't controlling the environment. If I was going to show up for somewhere, for example, an advanced team would go and check out the site. Whenever I left a certain radius in Kabul, there would be, like a convoy of armored vehicles, and then men standing outside the door with guns. You can imagine how that might have affected the conversations that happened inside those walls and whether they were open or not. So in December of 2011, right as I was kind of hitting peak frustration with a lot of things in this environment, I did what rich white people do normally when they're facing a crisis. I went on vacation. And I went to Cambodia, and in this little beach town called Sihanoukville, I walked into a used bookstore and picked up a copy of George Orwell's first novel, Burmese Days. I'm guessing most people in this room have read 1984. I'm guessing probably no one has read Burmese Days, so here's a spoiler alert. The main character's name is Flory. He works for the British East India Company in Burma, and he's there in a very sort of lifeless environment in the club that's only for the white British people, trying to find himself a nice white British wife. But he's conflicted. He has a particular alliance to an Indian doctor who's a friend of his who's trying to get into the club, and he also has a local woman who he's in love with. And the story does not end well for Flory. He sticks it out. He doesn't leave. He doesn't believe he has other options in life besides continuing to work for this company. And in the end of the book, he commits suicide. So I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. That sounds pretty bleak. So I did another thing that rich white people often do on vacation in Southeast Asia. I had an epiphany. I decided I was going to change my life. I was going to leave the Foreign Service. I didn't know what I was going to do, but it was going to be okay. And I made it back to Kabul, and I stuck it out the rest of the tour. I have to comment on this slide because it's a little jarring and kind of crazy and also missing something. Every one of us, when we arrived, got this Excel spreadsheet called the Circle of Freedom. And originally, that entire circle in the middle was an image of a Talib with the pakol hat and an RPG launcher. And as you went through your tour, percentage-wise, it sort of slowly ticked around until you got this beautiful, idyllic beach scene, letting you know that your service was over and you were free to go. So this was particularly meaningful for me because I was looking forward to getting out. There were a lot of other things about the embassy in Kabul that were unhealthy for me personally, and a lot of things I won't go into today that I think the State Department is doing very, very wrong. But I was really excited to just get out of there and thought I could move on with my life. Then something else happened. Those little issues of risk and uncertainty and loss of control, it turns out that I'd internalized those as well. And so I went around talking to people, asking for advice, saying, what do you think I should do? I'm in this state of mind. This isn't working for me. What should I do? And across the board, people said things like, well, you know you'll never get another job. You know that the Foreign Service experience doesn't translate to the private sector. One person told me, I have a friend who got an MBA and now he's jobless. The economy is really bad. There's nothing you can do. Stick it out like the rest of us. So I compromised. I spoke with Human Resources in Washington, D.C. They convinced me not to leave. I took leave without pay for a year. I decided I'm just going to go take care of myself and figure out who I am, make myself healthy. Of course, I had no idea how to do that, right? There was no if this, then that here. There was if not this, then what? And the only thing I could think of was to go to my homeland, which is Utah. I have a really crazy family story. My great-grandparents helped found this commune in the West Desert, part of between Utah and Nevada called the Snake Valley. And I thought, well, I'll write a book, right? And I'll interview all my relatives and I'll find out who I am and where I'm from, and somehow this will reveal the answer, right? The if not this, then what part of the equation. And I did. I went out there and I interviewed all of my grandfather's living relatives. I dug into this research around the commune. I stayed there for a week just learning as much as I could. And then on the last day, I was driving from the commune up to the original homestead that my great-grandparents built in my 2004 Jeep Liberty Roscoe, who I loved, and this happened. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have a hard time looking at it. That is me standing next to the car, so you know it's okay. But I rolled, and if you look at the right side of this slide, I think it's up, you can't see it. You see the passenger seat here. The driver's seat is pretty completely smashed. There's no headrest there anymore. And so I find it pretty remarkable that I have a head walking out of this particular accident. To the best of my understanding and recollection, I tore off one of the back headrests and punched out the back window and managed to crawl through the rear side of the Jeep that hadn't been completely smashed, and somehow, fortunately, walked away. The rest is a long story, but the most important thing is that after this, my plans were gone. I mean, crushed. If I thought I didn't have the answers before, I sure didn't have them now. So I came back to this area, stayed with my parents in Federal Way while I recovered, and was trying to sort of deal with this kind of combined trauma, all the stuff that happened in Afghanistan. If that wasn't bad enough, now I had this car accident, and the sense that I was really not in control of my life at all. And so I did sort of like a little tour of America that year. This was 2012 to 2013, meeting with friends, meeting with mentors, and asking people, what do you think I should do with my life? I don't feel like I can go back to the State Department under any circumstances. What should I do? And a very well-meaning friend recommended this book, What Color is Your Parachute? And the idea is that, wait for it. The idea is that if you're going to make a career change, you have to plan for it, and you can choose one of three things. This is at least the summary I got. You can change your location, you can change your role, or you can change your industry. But you can't change all three of them at once, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to get out of DC, never go back. And so when my friend recommended this to me, I was like, the plane is on fire. I don't care what color my parachute is. I don't care if there is a parachute. If I stay here, I'm not going to make it. So I left with no plan, and I just kind of started moving forward into this grand uncertainty of having completely lost control, lost any illusion that I was going to be able to make a smooth transition. And the only thing I could find in Seattle was a very vaguely worded description of a co-working space, event venue, and innovation lab for inspiring people. I was like, well, I don't know if I'm ever going to be inspiring, but that's something I would like, and at the very least, I need to be inspired. So I started hanging out at the Impact Hub in Pioneer Square, and a few things started to happen. First, I had put some things in motion to change my life. I took what was left of my savings and made a promise to a landlord and moved out of my parents' house into Seattle. The next thing that happened was that I noticed that I wasn't the only person who was struggling with a sense of not knowing what was next for my life. Pioneer Square has a major homelessness problem. Not sure if you know this, but it's visible every day on the street outside of Impact Hub and really anywhere you go. And it was there that I found a number of people who were really interested in figuring out what we could do about this. We had no idea what. We just thought, okay, we've got some technologists who want to make a difference on homelessness. We've got the energy to put behind this. Let's create a thing. And so this project called Hack to End Homelessness was born and started to come together. We approached it very open-mindedly, put together a bunch of nonprofit partners, and ended up creating this vision for a big event. But we weren't out of the woods yet. By this point, I had been out of work for nearly 18 months, making almost no money, going through my life savings, and now I was on the hook for around $10,000 in expenses. No sponsors, and no idea if we were going to be able to sell tickets. And that was a huge risk. But then once again, things somehow started coming together. A company called Globus and Pioneer Square sponsored us with $5,000, and we sold enough tickets to pack a house and put together some really incredible projects, some of which were covered in Fast Company. And then as David mentioned, again, through some magic alchemy I don't understand, within a year of moving to Seattle, I went from being completely broke and having no work to being named one of the 51 most influential people in the city that I love. Around that time, I was having this, again, maybe not an identity crisis, but I really was ready to sort of pin things down and understand who I was and what I was going to do in the world. I asked a good friend of mine which of these words he would use to describe me, really hoping that he would choose like entrepreneur or writer. And I gave him 5 choices: entrepreneur, consultant, writer, freelancer, and activist. And this is what he said. Freelance, activist. And to me, that sounded like a recipe for eternal poverty. But somehow that wasn't the case. Somehow this turned out to be a pretty accurate reflection of who I really am. And people started to notice and to want my work. I got some really awesome gigs working for Shunpike Arts to put together a project called Hive Mind, working for the city on a project called Hack the Commute, and working with the Washington Technology Industry Association on an event that attempted to bring together technology and innovation and public policy, all these things that I was discovering that I really deeply loved. And then, again, as if by magic, in December, I was hired as the first ever civic technology advocate for the city of Seattle, which is maybe a little bit different than being a freelance activist, but I'm creating an entirely new portfolio of work within the political infrastructure, which to me is just something that is beyond my wildest dreams. In fact, if you'd asked me when I was leaving Kabul if I had any inkling that I would end up working in tech, I would have laughed at you. But here I am. I consider myself very much part of the tech community, and I'm really excited to discover this. Anyway, I go back all the time now to these 3 words, these 3 things that I was so afraid of at the beginning of all of this, and that I was taught to fear, to avoid risk, to avoid uncertainty, and whatever the cost to maintain control. But I now find that these 3 things are my closest friends and allies, not just in life, but in every project I take on. Because without them, there's no space for magic. Without them, when you ask, if not this, then what, you're looking for 2 concrete objects that you can somehow tie together or just swap out. 1 equals 1. Now I think about things in terms of, if not this, then what, with curiosity and imagination. And that's what I want to leave with everyone here today. If there's something that frustrates you in your life or in society that you want to change, don't pressure yourself to know right away what the if this, then that is. Just ask yourself, if not this, then what? And let your imagination soar. Thank you. So I get to take questions now, if anyone has them. David? Yeah, so it entails a lot of open data Taylor Swift. Really, though, civic technology is a rapidly emerging field. It's really fascinating if you haven't heard about it. But for me, it's kind of part of this bigger project of creating little spaces in ways that we can work that risk and uncertainty and devolution of control to people in some ways within the existing structure of bureaucracy. So it's really exciting to see how we can use technology to help people imagine new ways of doing business that might actually be better than how we're doing things now. So we are rolling out a new open data policy. That's one of the first big things that is happening right now, which means we're working with every department across the city to help make more information open. It's really also kind of a long-term project, though, of just stitching together 2 communities that think in very different ways. There's a lot of resources in the technology, design, and innovation worlds that I think can and should be applied to political and social problems, but often people are approaching that without the insight on the other side into what makes those problems so complex to begin with. So we do things like hackathons and meetups that help bring together both sides of that, helping public officials get out of their compound, the Seattle Municipal Tower, and do more fun things in the community. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is about imposter syndrome, and it's a great question. I think part of this and part of what I think is really important in the world is to create space for those unknowns. I think one of the reasons we have imposter syndrome is because we don't really leave space for transition in our culture. We don't leave a lot of room for people to leave something without necessarily knowing what's next. And I think it's also important to point out that being able to do that in any scenario takes a tremendous amount of privilege. To be able to put your life on hold and not earn money for a long time, it takes a lot of confidence that you're going to be able to get out of it. But I do think that it's kind of all of our collective imposter syndrome is we're holding each other back. Because it means that we don't allow ourselves to imagine who someone is or who they might be or who they might be becoming until they've already proven to us that we're there. So the best answer I can give you is to just kind of figure out what that ground truth is for you and who you are and trust it, even if on the surface it doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Your gut is telling you where to go, even if it's nothing more than walking into a co-working space and saying, this is where I want to be. Yeah. You're welcome. Has anyone read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up? Awesome. So my answer to that is that I had no other option. I didn't know why. I felt this energy. I felt that there was something that needed to be done, and I really wanted to do it. Even when and at the beginning, people were like, why are you doing this? Just give money to an existing nonprofit. This is a waste of resources. But I knew that wasn't it, right? I knew that wasn't the what. And so I just had to keep pursuing it for myself. I think one of the hardest things for me about thinking about that book project that never got finished, by the way, I put a lot of love and energy and risked my life for in a very serious way. That's maybe never going to be finished. I don't know. It's for me at this point, it's like if something isn't making me come alive, if I don't have enough energy and resources to make it happen in some way, no matter what the cost, then it means that I don't really want to do it. And that can be hard to let go of, but I think it's moving from a mindset of it would be great to do all these things, or it would be great to have all these things, to what do I really need and what am I passionate about in the world. And when you clear all that other stuff away, the energy that is freed up for these real passion projects is amazing. Yeah. That's a really great question, and I think it's something a lot of people haven't figured out, but I think awareness is the first step in action. And for example, with Hack to End Homelessness, out of all of those projects, only one of them grew up into a really big thing that will launch later this month. It's called We Count. Keep an eye out for it. But I've watched many people who were involved in that event, including me, become more and more deeply involved in the issue. And perhaps more importantly, when it comes to politics, having some level of literacy or understanding around what's going on is hugely important, and it's something I think a lot of us don't have. I mean, raise your hand if you feel like you understand why the homelessness crisis is so big. Right? It's complex. So anything that we can do to kind of raise our understanding and help us at least be discerning about which political choices to make is tremendously valuable. Anything else? Okay, yeah, here. Mm-hmm. So in a very cut and dry sense, I had a lot of mentors and sponsors at the State Department, but I can't name a single person for you now, which is not because they don't exist. It's because I get that mentorship and sponsorship and inspiration from community. That's why I think it's really important to participate in community and make space for it. You don't always find what you need from a one-to-one relationship, but being part of Impact Hub, for example, is what connected me to everyone that has made my life in Seattle what it is. And I have a lot of people that I can call on for help when I need it, and a lot of people who call on me. And I think that's the most nourishing way to get what I need from mentorship. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is on the CreativeMornings site, but one of the things that's magical about community is that it doesn't have to have that kind of direct relationship, like I went to this event and then, found this person's email. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd today, and it's been exciting just to realize that, like, when we keep showing up for things, we keep finding each other. And so whether it's coming back to Creative Mornings next month or, exchanging business cards and meeting with someone personally or just going to other events around the stuff that inspires you, that's how it gets done. I mean, and with everything that I've done, it's either been I showed up and just started making connections with people who had self-declared as interested in an issue, whether that was homelessness or using technology for good. And then I also put myself out there and raised my hand in a very risky public way and said, I'm going to do this. Who wants to help me? I need some help. And it just, when you put out what you want into the world, it helps people learn how to find you and becomes very easy to build that. But from a technological standpoint, go to the Creative Mornings website or tweet things. And
so in that spirit, can I just say that my issue is changing corporate culture through design.
Great. Awesome. Come find you. Yes. Whoosh, those are big questions. Okay, so the first one is my office thinking about creating a forum for people to connect to, want to make change on particular things, and then the second is what's my wild, crazy idea? Okay, so the first one is fairly easy. I mean, creating my office, N equals 1, me, is a big step in that direction. Like much of my work is just about finding people who are working on things and connecting them to each other and the resources they need, but also about participating wherever that's already happening. And it's pretty cool. There's civic technology groups like Open Seattle, emerging groups at University of Washington. We work a lot with code schools. So, it's just kind of finding like who's already out there that is either doing this or I think would be interested in doing this, and how can I help those people come together resources they need. I still don't have a web page, but I do a lot on my Twitter account, official one. So that's one way that for now we're trying to pull people together. And then, I don't necessarily have like a wild, crazy idea in the sense of a tangible thing, but I do have this wild, crazy idea that we can kind of break down the existing barrier between government and people, this relationship that says, I want you to do this, go find a way, and then report back to me, to something that's much more collaborative, where we're all raising our hands and saying, there's a problem in our community. No one's going to take care of it except us, so let's just start moving forward. And I think if we can approach any kind of social or political change with that mindset, that open-mindedness, willingness to contribute, and willingness to tolerate it when our government takes risks, we're going to end up in a much more dynamic and socially just world. One more question? Okay. Yeah, so there's, it's a great question. How are we actually going to take this technology and bring it to people? I'm doing a lot of thinking and writing and conversations around that question. How do we do that in a really meaningful way? I don't think anyone has figured it out yet, but I think basically what has happened is in this space, you've got like two different sort of vectors heading out, and technology over here and government over here. I'm trying to just kind of pull them together so that we're at least innovating in the same direction, and that so that the bridges that I have to build between that sort of innovation world and what we do in government are shorter and smaller, and so that we can really be more of a platform for helping people contribute to their own democracy and their own community. All right, I think that was my last question. I have to turn it over to David, but thank you so much for having me here today.